Good evening. This is Steve and Yana Benoon from Israeli News Live, and we have with us today long-awaited guest, Deborah Tavares from StopTheCrime.net. And Deborah, so many people have written me, where are you? How are you doing? So can you please tell us, how are you doing?
Well, thank you for everyone's concern. I'm in the same boat that you're all in. And I just read the policies, and I know where I am. I'm safe right now. I have been attacked multiple months over 2020, and I won't go into the detail of that, but just to let you know that you are all now under attack, and we will be discussing what that means. So, as Yana said, I do run the website StopTheCrime.net as well as PrimaryWater.org. So I would ask for you to please subscribe to StopTheCrime.net to the YouTube video channel, and be sure to click the bell notification so that you are notified whenever we post a new video. And we also do a number of email blast outs as well that you would be notified as well. Now, we're going to be covering a number of topics this evening because it's been a while since I've been on the program with Yana and Steve. So I want to start out by saying this quote. I've said this dozens and dozens of times over the years, but for me, and likely for all of you, it is becoming, you're able to really grasp the enormity of these words. So this was from the former FBI director, and it is a warning. And the former FBI director was J. Edgar Hoover in 1956, and he said, quote, "The individual is handicapped by coming face to face with a conspiracy so monstrous he cannot believe it exists. The American mind simply has not come to a realization of the evil which has been introduced into our midst. It rejects even the assumption that human creatures could espouse a philosophy which must ultimately destroy all that is good and decent." And I will tell you that it resonates with many people now more than before, because as we are learning the enormity of the takedown of humanity and the sheer brink of survivability that we all exist in now. So while I'm going to cover a number of heart-palpitating issues this evening, I'm going to go over a number of what's in the news today. And today is Friday, December the 19th of 2020. And I'm just going to read a few headlines, go over a few topics, and we're going to dive into some policies that are going to affect each and every single one of you in such a broad way that unless you take action and do some of the things necessary, you will not survive. Let me say that again. Without taking certain actions of some of the topics that I will be discussing, you may not and will not survive. So let's go over some of the headlines today. They're talking about how a nurse faints minutes after getting the COVID-19 jab. Also, Fairbanks clinician is third Alaskan with adverse reaction of the COVID shot, which has, of course, now just been released.
Yeah.
They talk about how the wealthy scramble for the shot. And if they donate $25,000, would that help them get in line sooner? Rich people cut through the line. Pfizer has millions of doses, but no idea where to ship them. Ex-FDA chief whacks the feds for withholding from states. So certain states are being withheld from the COVID vaccine. And we have to wonder why that would be. COVID epicenter now is in California, and for all of you, that is where I am. And I will tell you that we have had increased mandatory stay-at-home orders, and we had an emergency alert sent to all of our phones here in Northern California today. Again, today being December 19th, Friday of 2020. So the increased orders are to more rigidly enforce your inability to go out, with certain exceptions, going out of your house and traveling. We'll go over more of what this is really all about, because what all of this is really about, and there's of course many aspects of genocide, but we're educated into ignorance, and the system is so corrupt and so deceptive that we're so poisoned and so ignorant that we have all been and gone through their lockstep scenario planning for where we are now and what we face with the COVID and other power outages. They are doing scenario planning on all levels. And so what we have is lockstep now to lockdown. And what we have also is fast tracking the inability to access resources due to COVID and other factors. And I'll get into that. So also a headline today is the San Francisco health director warns that the city is on the edge of a catastrophic situation, and that, again, we're in the epicenter here. They also are talking about the hack of the century, NSA alarm, act of war by Russia. So since March, question mark. So that's something that all of you can look up. We're watching all of these headlines just continue to percolate in every newspaper, every magazine. And this is all psychological warfare, all part of what is being delivered to us now, so that we become so fearful we start complying, and we have. We're on the verge, they're saying, of spending $3 trillion in December for the national debt climbs to $28 trillion. Well, all of us know the national debt is well beyond $28 trillion, as they have funded many secret operations. Mm-hmm. They talk about how a beach town is rocked because an ex-governor of the gang-plagued Mexican state was shot dead in Puerto Vallarta. So I know many people talk about fleeing the United States, going out of the country. Just remember, these other countries are dictatorships run by drug mafia and the CIA and more. Third world countries are very unsafe, and the poor people are fleeing South America and Central America and Mexico, trying to get into the United States, because sadly they falsely believe that there is a constitution here and they will be safe. But we are being chemtrailed and disposed of just like everyone else. And sadly, we've been so brainwashed and mind controlled that so many people are unaware here in the United States. But let's continue. The DHS improves biometric scanning of masked faces. So one of the recent protests in Paris was about the fact that the people were very disturbed that they had drones overhead that were capturing facial recognition and pinging from their cell phones. So with that in mind, I would recommend that everybody consider ordering what they call Mission Darkness. It is a RFID pocket, sort of like a protection, so it's not emitting, your cell phone does not emit, and it's used by the military. That's called Mission Darkness. You can type it in. There are a number of sizes. Many people are now putting their cell phones in that. It blocks the signal, and not carrying your cell phones when you travel outside of your vehicle. If you go into stores or shopping or wherever you go, it's now being recommended that you do not bring your cell phones in because of all the GPS tracking, so that you will be monitored. We're going to talk about the enormity of the anticipated monitoring and where that is going. So while you still can reduce some of that monitoring, it will empower you to think, to have the sense that you can slow some of that down, although that's questionable, but I know many people that are doing that.
Right.
Google is an antitrust case which won't be brought to trial until 2023. And of course, Google is one of the controlling factors of the world's information now, as we know, and much more. They also talk about the update, the hack against USA, which is, they're saying, a grave threat. We know that we're going to experience more cyber attacks. We were told that in Event 201 and in the Rockefeller document, which I discuss with Jana and on my own on StopTheCrime.net on our YouTube video channel. The Rockefeller document went in great detail over the fact that we would be cyber attacked. In fact, I've covered that to the extent that we know that the global infrastructure of electricity will be taken down, and it has been. People say, well, Deborah, when do you think that will happen? Well, for many of you that have experienced weather assaults and weather attacks, you've possibly had power outages. I've been watching millions of people all over the world experience outages based on various attacks. But the truth is that most people are unaware that the power grid is aging worldwide, and it's extremely vulnerable. It has been allowed to be vulnerable. But few people really know how vulnerable the grid is, and that it will be used to hold countries hostage in the not-too-distant future as power is prevented. And we will literally be plunged into long-term darkness. So for those of you that are not prepared to face what it will be like without power, you need to understand and live through an outage. So turn your lights off, flip your breakers, or easier yet, tape your light switches so that you can't inadvertently turn the power on, and live in darkness without electricity for a number of days. Start writing down what you need. Now, in the case of a power outage, which could cascade across the entire U.S. infrastructure faster than any other problem imaginable and wreak total havoc for everybody, one of the first things you will not be able to access will be water. Of course, food will be fast-tracking right behind that. So if you do not have water stored up, then you will be some of the first victims to certainly run out of water. You can't survive without water for for very long. So you have to imagine being without electricity for an extended period of time, and being without electricity because you've used up your quota as well, which is what the smart meter grid was all about, which was deployed worldwide. Those are those electric smart meters that we have fought against for a very, very long time. But you have to think about the overall infrastructure breakdown, how there will be traffic lights out and traffic jams, and mass outbreak of waterborne sicknesses. In fact, we're going to talk about a couple of waterborne sicknesses right now, and a reason why every single one of you that can should get a water filtration system installed. It doesn't matter if you're on a well water, particularly if you're on a municipal water supply. It has been greatly recommended that you have a water filtration system. This is what has been happening. This is bio warfare, and using laboratory creations to create vectors out of bugs and insects. So here are a couple of things that I just recently found out about relating to water vectors and illnesses. I did not know that there was a Guiana worm disease where people become infected with the Guiana worms when they drink water contaminated with the microscopic larvae that migrate through the body and grow into worms up to 3 feet long. A year after the infection, the worms emerge from the body through painful blisters, causing permanent scarring and at times permanent disability. This is a horrific disease, and it affects people in Africa. There is no cure that exists, and the disease can be prevented by filtration of water and keeping patients with emerging worms out of the water sources. So while they're saying this is just in Africa, our water is being poisoned with vectors and larvae all over the world. And the situation with the electromagnetic frequencies and literally reducing and eliminating the oxygen, which is the buildup of the larva and many diseases that we're going to experience. So water filtration should be a big one, and water storage after you filtered your water should be of high consideration. I also want to talk about river blindness, because river blindness has been occurring and affecting millions of people. And it's a parasitic disease that's spread by black flies that breed in fast-flowing water. Victims experience chronic and severe itching, skin rashes, and vision impairment that can lead to permanent blindness. Worldwide, they're saying that there are 120 million people at risk of being infected, and 270,000 have already been blinded by this river blindness, mostly in Africa, but also in Latin America and in Yemen. So the black communities worldwide are being targeted. They're not only being targeted by lab vectors, but also the increased frequencies and the deployment of more cell towers and the free gifts from the telecom communication system of death frequencies by giving them wireless communication devices for their children for distant learning. Mm-hmm. But you are all being targeted, because if you are at home, working from home, or you're allowing your children to distant learn on frequencies, you are literally contributing to their death, because frequencies are a weaponized warfare use by the military. To go on about river blindness, it causes the social and economic fabric of entire communities to unravel. Agricultural production drops, children must care for their sick parents, and young adults, fearing they will become blind, leave the homes. So where has river blindness predominantly been? That has about 245 million people involved, is Nigeria, Sudan, South Sudan, Cameroon, Uganda, Ethiopia, and 6 Latin American countries. River blindness has been eliminated. Now they're saying there's no cure if you are contaminated by the river blindness, but they say it's been eliminated in Ecuador, Colombia, Guatemala, and Mexico. And I think many of us would have cause to believe that that may not be true. And it would be opening up the door for people that are fleeing out of the United States to think perhaps they will be safer in those countries, because I know many people are looking to flee into other countries. But again, probably not a good idea, as we have talked to many expats that have left and returned, because certainly as we're amped up at borders and requirement of COVID vaccinations and more becomes a requirement, you will not be able to leave where you are, and you won't be able to stay where you are, and so you will be forcibly returned to your countries of origin.
Absolutely.
That's what we have been told in the documents. Yes, Anna.
That's a very good advice that you just gave, because COVID rules are even more strict and enforced in a much worse way than here. I mean, up till now. And I know that it's going to come here as well. But it's always better to be in your home country where you know people, where you have family, right? Am I correct?
Well, absolutely, Anna. Right. And in fact, we're going to talk about some of the a situation in another country that is developing now, and we'll cover that in just a moment. And I know that we discussed this. It is horrifying, so we'll hit that in just a moment. But some of the other headlines is how Hawaii opens up to tourists again, but beware of the COVID hurdles. So before you think you can travel, because many people sadly still believe that traveling is open to them, and because the COVID requirements are so fluid on a daily and even weekly basis, you could end up somewhere and then not be able to return until you comply to that moment's new rules and regulations. And we're going to talk about this, and you're going to be stunned. But let's talk about a few other things. Israel has now started to vaccinate, but the Palestinians may wait for months. Pandemic hitting meat plants again. In other words, our meat supplies are going to start to evaporate. Food supplies, of course, are being hit. Supply chains are being massively hit. It's interesting how this EU conflict in the UK is affecting the shipping of goods and products. If you go on to Sky News and you look at the headlines of Sky News, you can see the thousands upon thousands of shipping containers that are loaded up on docks, and you will see ships that are loaded with the containers, and they're not able to distribute those products right now. Mm-hmm. So this is all intentional through the EU. Don't make any mistake. This is a planned disruption of the world's supply line. And you can watch this, the pictures, on Sky News. Again, just type in Sky News, current events, and go to the one that discusses the global shipping. Also, New York bans diners from using restaurant bathrooms. We're finding, as we're traveling a little bit now, and many people are telling us there are no restrooms open. So people are doing their business in the bushes and around the back of buildings because the restrooms are closed. There's also, they're saying that college students are being recruited as teachers to keep the schools open. Well, let's just say a few things about that. If at this point you are still sending your children to school to be educated in ignorance and out of the reality that is, it is a form of child abuse at the highest level. And the government owns your children anyway. When you look into some of the rules and regulations back in 1933, and you look at a variety of ways in which the government tells you that you are owned by the government. And also, I want you to think about the acronym for the word law. It means that our controllers control the land, the air, and the water. Wow. They control everything. And more important now is to unschool your children. Do not let them zoom in to regular school indoctrination. And I would recommend that you hardwire all of your laptops and whatever gadgets you have that might be wireless now, because that is deadly. Again, these are military frequencies being used as public communication devices, and you are literally being murdered in your wireless homes with Wi-Fi and all of the other aspects of wireless. But I would recommend that you look up on YouTube John Taylor Gatto, Gatto, and get some ideas on how you unschool. And I can't underscore that enough, because at this point we really have to be concerned about sending our children to school when we have ownership of all of us by the government, and how easily your children could be locked down in school, and you may not be able to pick up your children. This is part of the program as well. Right now,
and they can vaccinate them without your consent, without parents' consent.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Well, it's called parens patriae, and parens patriae means that government owns us and our children. And I have covered this in many previous radio shows. In fact, Jana, a very, very dear friend of mine, was on many radio shows with me, and we covered this very important understanding numerous times. So if you go back into stopthecrime.net, you will find a link to the Rense Radio Network shows that I did for over a year, about a year and a half, and they're just all dated. We pulled them off the Rense Radio site, and you need to listen to some of those interviews. Sadly, they have not ended up in YouTube fashion. So I would recommend you go to stopthecrime.net. On the home page, you will see Rense Radio Network, and if you click on that, you're going to get all these dates of radio shows. I interviewed a number of people before they were murdered, and I go over that, and sad to say, there's been a tremendous loss of whistleblowers and people. But I just want to say this before I get into this COVID-safe check-in requirement now, because we've been told for so long that our lives in the world we live in will certainly change, and impacts will be felt by all. They've been telling us and giving us dates like 2030, 2035, 2045, and 2050 that changing demographics create new threats. In other words, we're talking about climate survivors or refugees, and the new threats created by relocating large population swaths for a variety of reasons. And they talk about and have told us with the aging populations in many developed countries and youth bulges in some developing countries, we're likely to be coupled with the growing number of migrants across the globe as we become more connected. They talk about gender inequality and driving poverty and in food insecurity and security in large parts of the world where governments, which are corporations, will come under immense pressure to address the coming challenges. And they talked and have told us if social expectation fail to be met, social unrest or even violence can ensue. And we're going to be seeing that because certainly our social expectations are failing. And over 70% of a growing global population looks to be set to live in the cities by 2045, and that's an intention to corral us up in human settlement zones. We've talked about that. But they talk about where urbanization, meaning city life, is managed successfully, it could spur economic growth and create a better quality of life. But they tell us if it's handled poorly, people may live in slums. Well, they are living in slums. The homeless impact is unbelievable in the United States and elsewhere all over the world. And they talk about without adequate infrastructure. Let me mention a couple things about adequate infrastructure. Let's look at the impact of frequencies that are decimating our infrastructure, our buildings. Frequency pulsing on buildings, all infrastructure, bridges, dams, buildings, your homes, the plumbing in your homes. As you are pulsated by the frequencies that you are using in your modern life to kill you, it's also creating infrastructure failure in all buildings, as I just mentioned, because it's creating a continuous mini earthquake experience in the buildings, etc. So I wanted to mention that because I haven't said that for quite some time. But they talk about how there would be a driving increase in communicable diseases, poverty, and leading to violent insurrections, that we would need more food and water and better sanitation. Well, let's talk about this. The sanitation is being attacked too by the frequencies. Your infrastructure cannot stay together when we're hit with frequencies and weather weapons. We had a horrific flood here in Northern California where our wastewater treatment plant was inundated by what they called an atmospheric river overhead, a new type of technology to create clouds and storms. So they call it an atmospheric river. It breached our wastewater treatment plant, and untreated sewage and certainly pharmaceuticals and urine literally flowed out into low-lying basins and down a Russian River, which is very near to Bohemian Grove, and impacted thousands of homes and literally flooded an area of a town near where I am. So we're talking about mass attack on a massive level with the use of weather weapons that they are calling climate change. And we have been being told for decades and decades, without successfully managing all of these stresses, we are going to have global failure, and billions of people will suffer. And they've talked about how there will be water shortages. I have videos where I have found documents from Rothschild talking about planned water shortages. And one of the videos I've had up for quite some time is Water Wars, stealing water for profit and control. And you may want to watch that, because I do talk about those documents that we found out of Israel and the UK, and all of the various corporations that have been set up to deceive us. We are pummeled by a network of corporations that are running the show on behalf of the 13 families that literally run the world.
Yes.
So we've been told this. We have had difficulty in believing these words. I know when I first read these words, they were foreign. The concepts seemed impossible. But then we were all programmed, and we were all sent through an education encampment system to teach us untruths. And we must learn as quickly as we can. For those of you that want to preserve the human species, you really do have to learn. And that's also plant life and animals as well. We're being destroyed. But
Definitely.
Let me go in.
Listen, Deborah, since you did mention plant life, just real quick, something we talked about today was sudden oak death. I have never heard that term before. And
yes,
can you explain that?
Yes, I will. Sudden oak death is a oak failure that we're having here, not only in California but elsewhere. Berkeley, UC Berkeley, is of course a organization run by the globalist, and they have scientists that weigh in like other scientists, saying that we have climate change versus acknowledging the use of weather weapons. So UC Berkeley is all part of the network of disinformation. And I attended a number of meetings where UC Berkeley came up here to Sonoma County and had meetings about how our trees were falling down. Now, many people built homes around beautifully structured oak trees, and the oak trees were failing. And they were being told, gosh, we really don't know why they're failing. You've got to paint all the limbs with a certain product, and you've got to pull all of the laurel, the California laurels and other laurels, from around the base, because they're carrying the disease that's spreading onto the oak trees. In fact, they were creating a map, a GPS map up here in Northern California. And this is happening to you too, because this is not just sudden oak death disease. This is chemtrail disease, the intentional use of spraying chemicals and poisons onto all plant life and all life itself. So as I say, sudden oak death, just understand this is just a way in which they're explaining how people's beautiful, gorgeous trees are collapsing all over, and they are. So what they were telling us at these meetings about 5 years ago now was that the GPS maps would be used to identify properties where sudden oak death had been noticed. And they were hiring citizen scientists to walk around their communities and notice if they saw laurel shrubs under oak trees, and then to put that address and send it in to UC Berkeley so that that property could be potentially added to the list that would have possibly sudden oak death. Well, they were also saying that this disease is spread on our car tires. And so certain areas would be literally off bounds. They also told us that if people removed their fallen trees, they had to contain the cut down materials on their properties, because taking it anywhere would spread the disease. Even your tools used to cut down the limbs would have to be disinfected, and that this would be spread by your shoes, not just your car tires and the tools, but by your shoes as well. This is all disinformation. This is a big cover-up for what really is happening to the millions and millions of trees that are dying, not only in the United States, but worldwide. So it's very, very important, as you're hearing the decline of tree health and the fact that we're watching how the trees are exploding when the fires, when the arsonists create fires here. The trees are exploding from the inside out because the trees have had so many years of uptake of heavy metals that are highly combustible. And it's just like plaque in our veins. When the trees take up all of these heavy metals, they just literally combust from the inside. And we're talking about all trees now are facing instability. So if you have trees near your home that could collapse on you during a planned assault with heavy winds, you need to eliminate those trees. I have a very interesting YouTube that I fell upon recently. I'm going to describe it to all of you, and I would urge you all to go and find this YouTube video on YouTube. Type in YouTube, White Death, 1949, Wyoming. White Death, 1949, Wyoming. I did not know, because that was the year that I was born, that between January and April of 1949, there was a blizzard that had never prior been recorded in any fashion worldwide up to that point. And there was literally a whiteout and snow buildup for 3.5 months. It shut down most of the state. And it's horrific because they interview survivors of that event. Now, for those of you that understand increased electromagnetic frequencies in the air, which is all part of how they induce weather modification and weather attacks, you will hear, and I hope I'm quoting it close, it's close enough, pay close attention. They talk about how there were some rifles that were there during that event in 1949, and all of a sudden there were sparks flying out of the barrels for no reason. They didn't understand why that was happening. You will hear them describe the snow didn't feel right. It wasn't right. The snow was not right. You will see the millions of cattle that literally froze, and many horses that froze, and deer and pheasant froze. The indigenous American natives, Indians that were on the reservation, suffered the worst. I would watch this White Death on YouTube, it's a documentary, as soon as possible, and understand the use of weather weapons even then.
Yes.
That was a weather weapons attack. And for those of you that don't realize how long weather weapons have been used, been decades, and decades.
Yes.
So watch that.
Before we go into this information from Australia,
yes,
and you were talking about some of the headlines, we got today some intel from military that told us that they were specifically told not to take vaccine that public will be offered because military will be getting a different type of vaccines, which kind of makes me worried that they are targeting, with these vaccines, they're targeting us specifically by populations, by gender, by, it seems like they're going to give different vaccines to elderly, different to children, different to healthcare workers, different to military. Like they have this technology within these vaccines where they can target populations selectively. What do you think?
That is absolutely true. And for all of you that have not yet read Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars, it's about a 40-some-odd page document. I would suggest you read about the last 5 pages. If you cannot read 40-some-odd pages, minimally read the last 5. It will tell you why the military was created. that it was intentionally created as part of a genocide program, and how it was sold to us as being patriotism, and how the global elites utilize various types of programs to destroy our military men and women that are patriotic and want to serve to protect our country, when our country is under attack by a higher up reality than us just fighting amongst nations. That's all pre-planned. We know that the bankers finance all sides of the war.
Yes.
But I would recommend that you read at least the last 5 pages of Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars, because it does talk, Yana, about just what you're saying.
Yes, I
Our
did
young
read
men
it, and they're mocking us in there as well, in a way that how they persuaded the mothers to send their sons to their
Yes.
wars. You know, it's really horrific to read this. And
It is.
Yeah.
And I wanted to just read an email that I received. This is something else that I've talked about, but something that is sent to me, and this is happening as well. This is a person that's letting me know that they are being heavily harassed by mainstream media and online alternative media. In other words, this is a heavily targeted individual. And it seems all of you have access to this specific person's surveillance data. So what they're telling me in this email is that all of their data is available for everyone to see. Just a tip. All of us what's being done to this person will be done to all of our children. And here's what this person is saying, and this is true. The harassment, the stalking online, the bullying, the bombardment of hints to let our children know they're being watched and remote neuromonitored 24/7, 365. And they can never escape this except for death. They can only escape this neuromonitoring 24/7, 365 only through death. You're hearing what a targeted individual has to live with. There are millions and millions that have been experimented on for many, many decades, that have had RFID chips that are nanobots. And these people have had some of these chips surgically removed. And Ilana Freeland, a friend of mine, is writing a book, and I'm anxious for her to finish it. It's going to be something entitled like synthetic biology, and very important. But to understand that we are being now synthetically altered, artificially altered. But they talk about how our children are facing never-ending criticism and judgments and ridicule and gang stalking and bullying online. You may not be aware of this. That is why you need to monitor what is happening to your children, because it's going to happen to all of our children, and very soon, and it's happening now. And children can't handle this type of increased bullying. In fact, bullying in school has been the result of many children committing suicide.
Yes.
Bullying is a program being used worldwide. We're all being bullied. We're all being harassed by bullying. And this person also talked about how there will be many broken-hearted parents and siblings as their families are destroyed by this online assault system. And meanwhile, they're saying that the media is distracted by harassing many people. Of course, the media is behind all of this. It's all CIA and controlled by the 13 families, the international bankers, etc. And the children will pay for the sins of their fathers. That's what this person ended the email by saying. And why this is important to understand is the increased targeting and how this is going to occur and has occurred worldwide. We're under a mass attack on many levels. So I wanted to bring in a couple of other things and then get into that COVID-safe check-in that's now being set up and has been set up in Australia, and how that will affect us here and worldwide. But let me go on into some important other things that are occurring with sustainable development and the required reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. There's a new report that has been released, and it is entitled it's from the World Resources Institute, and it's called The State of Climate Action, Assessing Progress Towards 2030 and 2050. And this is heartbreaking. This is real. And this is why you need to plan for power outages. Because in order to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, they've got to eliminate the use of resources and kill off millions and millions of people. These are genocide plans. And for me, it's ironic that people are not equating the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions to genocide, because that's what it is. So let's talk a little bit about what this report covers. It's a lengthy report, but I'm just going to read some of the excerpts I pulled out of it. They're talking about how the climate progress in six sectors is too slow to limit global warming. This is about the fake reality of global warming versus the use of weather weapons. Now, all of our kids that have been in school are being taught that it is global warming. That's what climate change is, and that we must reduce the temperature of the Earth by 1.5 degrees Celsius. And we have to do that quickly. And that really does, when you equate, and they equate this for you in the Paris Climate Accord, that reducing the warming by 1.5 Celsius puts us back into the mid-1750s. The mid-1750s. So you have to look at what life was like then without the use of machinery or modern conveniences. And the inability for most people to survive when they are in those circumstances. The sorry reality about thinking back about what it might have looked like living then, and you can look up movies that show life in that period of time, probably a good idea. But we have the technology that will present itself to us that was not available and used against us as weapons as those that lived back in the mid-1750s. We will have the drones. They will be self-activated by solar. They will not have to land to recharge. They can sit on power lines and recharge. They will be ongoing drones used to attack us. There will be various kinds of vectors, as you heard me discuss with the water vectors. We will have many insects used as vectors. And that is discussed in many climate action reports that your cities have adopted, your states have adopted, all countries worldwide have adopted the agreement to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So let's talk a little more specifically about where they're heading in this most recent report, because we're not lowering our greenhouse gas emissions enough. They're saying that we're not making fast enough progress to limit global warming by 1.5 degrees Celsius, according to this report from the World Resources Institute and Climate Works. The report analyzes 21 indicators across 6 sectors to find that the current climate efforts are too slow to drive a 50% cut in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. Let me read this again. We are to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, a 50% cut in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, and net zero emissions by 2050. That's 2050. Make no mistake. There's no such thing as zero energy. That does not exist unless there are no people, animals, or plants.
Right.
And I would recommend for those of you that have not yet watched the movie, Jana, that you just recently watched, and I'm trying to pull the name in my mind. Maybe The Giver.
The Giver, yes.
The Giver.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I would recommend that you all watch The Giver. So many of these movies portray our future reality in various ways.
Predictive programming in it, majorly.
Major, right.
Mm-hmm.
So they want us to cut our emissions. We're not doing it fast enough. They're talking about the transportation sector as, for an example, that the report said greater adoption of electric vehicles will be required and will depend on how efficiently governments promote behavioral change among all of us, and shifting people away from cars onto public transportation will need incentives for our behavior to change. The report goes on to say with policies. And I want to tell you, this was also interesting that I saw on Sky News, Yana. There was a young black girl in London that died, I think it was back in 2008. And they have now just figured out why, so they say. They show the area where this family lived, and it was along a very busily traveled street with lots of vehicles. They are now saying that her lack of ability to breathe was as a result of the cars and the pollution. Now, certainly we know that additives are added to the petroleum, and it is very toxic. And why do you think that they're building more intensified building along public transportation so that you're closer to travel? It's also part of a way in which to increase your demise because of all the pollution. But this report goes on to say that there must be a shift to renewables. And I've been talking about this for decades. I even have a section on stopthecrime.net. You can find it. It's called Kiss Your Gas Goodbye. And I show the documents that told us years ago that we would not be driving any more. Your cities have adopted these plans. I constantly suggest that people type in the name of your city or your state, Climate Action PDF, Climate Action Plan PDF. You will find out that this is supported by the Department of Energy, which is a globalist-controlled death trap agency, and signed on by you think you elect your city officials that seem to stay in position for years. At least that's what we observe with our city council members and our board of supervisors. And now that their offices are closed up and we can only zoom into their fake meetings to allow us to believe that we are really able to have a conversation with them, we find that COVID has offered a greater degree of protection as people start to realize the depths of the local people that have been involved in approving these policies. And what I mean by that is I can pull up any climate action plan anywhere, and within the first few pages, find the city leaders that agreed to those policies and approved them. And those are the people that live among you. They shop in the markets. A good thing they're wearing masks. And they are promoting policies of genocide. So let's continue with this policy now to remove all of our current ways in which systems are delivered to only renewables which are not reliable, because the renewables are controlled by weather technologies. So they want us to look at markets for storage and rooftop solar. You do not want to, if you can avoid it, install solar on your roofs. They have a switching mode power supply, very high EMFs. You want to, if you can, put solar on a structure that you build just on the ground, not on your roof. If it has to be on a roof, a pool house roof where you do not live, or your garage roof perhaps, you want to never ever install a system that requires a smart meter that will connect to the Internet of Things. This is a weapon, and your generated power will be sequestered when there is a state of emergency, which we are all in at all times, and they will take what you generate for needed infrastructure. Now, this needed infrastructure are the globalist control infrastructures that are destroying all of us. So understand you cannot be hooked up to the grid in any way with your solar panels. You must not be hooked up. And we talk about that in great detail on other videos, and we are also talking about the silicon gel batteries that have longer storage life. They don't combust like the lithium-ion batteries. I'm not going to say any more about that. I'm going to continue discussing this latest policy to massively reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. In other words, speed up the genocide programs.
That's right.
So they go on to say that they found that an increasing share of renewable energy used in electricity generation must be accelerated 5 years faster than it is right now. And coal must be phased out for electricity generation 5 times faster. In other words, they're getting rid of coal, and they want it all phased out 5 times faster than it is being phased out now. And the uptake of electricity and electric vehicles must happen 22 times faster than the rate of adoption in recent years. These requirements were calculated using historical data on the rate of change and specific targets for the year 2030 and 2050, 2050. Two areas where the world is doing especially poor is halting deforestation. Now, deforestation is a result of chemtrailing. The trees are succumbing to the programs of poison from the air, the death dumps from overhead. So they're telling us now that we must we must halt deforestation and curbing emissions from agricultural production. In other words, we can no longer grow agricultural production in the method in which we have in the past, which is why President Trump signed an executive order fast-tracking biofoods, and why we found also, Yana, in that book called Transhumanism that we talked about a little bit from time to time, where Argentina was set up on by Kissinger and Rothschild and the World Bank as planned to be an entire area where they were using biofoods, and Monsanto was involved.
Genetically modified foods, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yes. So they want us to eliminate all farming practices. And I have found that in documents here in Sonoma County because we are a very heavy agricultural area. And our city leaders, our city global Illuminati-fed United Nations leaders believe and tout the bounty of Sonoma County.
Yeah.
Excuse me, why don't you talk for a moment?
Well, one of the things that you mentioned was that they're going to be using even insects, right, against us. And what was interesting, I didn't want to interrupt you, but there is this report on how they're getting patent for genetically modified mosquitoes to deliver vaccines to people. So I am kind of wondering, because of course there is a lot of debate about vaccines among Christians, if this is a mark of the beast or should we take vaccines. Of course, we do not, under any circumstances, do not recommend to take any experimental vaccine into your body. I'm very strongly anti-vaccine, anti-vaxxer. But what really got me, Deborah, was, okay, so these people who won't take the vaccine, this cabal has thought of every avenue. Now they're talking... They
really have.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you brought that up because we do need to get to what is now occurring in South Australia. But I
Yeah.
wanted to just conclude, and thank you for
Sure.
stepping in there, because suddenly I was not able to talk very well. But a little bit more about this press release and the progress and lack of progress across all sectors of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. So they're calling also for greater climate financing across all sectors, private, philanthropic sectors, and for all governments, and that would be corporate governments, because all governments are a corporation. We are not only USA Inc., we are Earth Inc., and all businesses are to support more significant emission reduction policies. But they say the cost to carry out this rapid transformation could be steep, the report warns. It estimates that efforts to transform just the energy industry through more robust renewable portfolios will cost between 1.6 trillion and 3.8 trillion annually to the year 2050, meaning climate financing efforts need to step up. We are going to be financed into unpayable taxes, all of us. And what we're seeing here in Northern California, and you are seeing where you are too, we have massive land trusts occurring where people, individuals who have drunk the Kool-Aid and want their farms to remain, maybe they're retiring and they're selling with benefits their lands to the land trusts where they're under the assumption that their lands will be used for future generations and there will be no allowable construction of any division of their properties for future construction and multifamily, et cetera, et cetera. So they're signing it over to the parks system. When the county buys these lands, and they're paying for these lands, and then they're given to the park system, presumably to be used for parks for all of us, which are closed down by and large because of COVID and the restrooms can't be used and so forth and on. So they sell it as a system of park use, but then they get closed down. That's what we're finding here. But when they are placed in the park system, they no longer are assessed property taxes. So what we have here is the reduction of property tax collection because they're placing land into the Wildlands project, which of course we have on StopTheCrime.net, and we talk about that also. So just to conclude on some final points of this horrific genocide document, they're talking about how all future financing must be focused on renewable energy. They go on to say that they must have greater financing. And they talk about how electric vehicle adoption has accelerated in recent years as cities embrace the technology and the need to invest in charging infrastructure. But it remains to be seen if customer habits can change, especially to ease range anxiety. And they go on to say the American Lung Association earlier this year found a widespread shift to electric vehicles could bring immense economic and health benefits, although making upfront investments in charging infrastructure and the vehicles themselves could still be very tricky. Well, let me add a few things to this. If you do not live within your city growth boundary, and you can find that out, if you are in the country, in what they call the Wildlands Urban Interface, they will not be putting in very many charging stations. So as they eliminate petroleum as a fuel and all the other fuels for all renewables, you won't be able to even get to your houses. That's how they're going to force the behavioral changes that are required. And they're indicating here that people have range anxiety. In other words, their electric vehicles won't take them very far. Well, COVID is the perfect shoehorn for bringing in all of these sustainable development goals. This is what is happening. Our range of travel is being eliminated. Our ability to go out and about is being eliminated. We went to a restaurant today and we ordered takeout because, of course, that's all you can do. And attached to the bag with our takeout was a note saying, "Thank you for helping us try to stay in business. Try to stay in business." We are being destroyed.
Yes.
That is what is happening. So most financing, again, will be focused on renewable energy. And they say that climate adaptation must receive all available financing. And they talk about how worldwide richer countries should do more financially to help poorer countries reduce their dependence on fossil fuels. Now, let me just underscore, fossil fuels was made up by Rockefeller. He realized that if he could create the illusion that we were going to run out of fuel by calling it fossil fuels rather than a renewable resource, he could make billions of more dollars than if we all knew that petroleum was a renewable. So in all your books, everything that your children are reading, all of the climate action plans that have been adopted in all of your cities are based upon fossil fuels. You need to note that because that is the ignorance shift of our knowledge, one of many. So they, again, say that the richer countries need to help financially help the poorer countries get off the dependence of fossil fuels and mitigate the effects of climate change. So let's think about that. If we pull the rug out from poorer countries because of our wealth, we decimate and destroy and genocide those countries. But on the flip side, many of those countries are not as reliant on the level of the use of electricity and other benefits, and they will hopefully maybe survive a little longer than many of us in the wealthier countries. But they go on to say how Get Smart Cities News, which is where I go often, and they go on to talk about in the bid to try and raise additional funds at local level for climate action, a number of governments in the United States have turned to ballot initiatives. Now, of course, that's getting your buy-in, certainly getting the false propaganda out about your need to increase your taxes and through ballot initiatives, especially as local budgets have been decimated by the coronavirus pandemic. And we were decimated by the wildfires. And many of you were decimated by floods and storms and tornadoes and hurricanes.
Yes.
Beyond that, some have suggested turning to public-private partnerships and other alternative funding mechanisms in areas like energy efficiency. What they are talking about is to the controllers, giving it up, and we already have. And then they go on, there is some evidence that local governments are looking to invest in some less visible but still important ways to mitigate climate change. For example, New York City voted recently to strengthen the building requirements of its Climate Mobilization Act in acknowledgement of the impact that sector has on emissions. They say to us in this report, it will take all levels of all governments and business sectors to step up and take action. After they talk about how the current administration thwarted the ability to effectively reduce greenhouse gas emissions because we did not sign on to the Paris Peace Accord. Well, we may not have signed on to the Paris Peace Accord, but all of these policies were adopted in every county and every city by every state throughout the United States. So that was just to create the illusion for those that understand that climate change is not the reality of what we face. So they talk about how cities and states have stepped up with their own policies to cut emissions in lieu of federal leadership. While goals have been set, they said everyone can do a better job at transparency and keeping track of the progress. So this is just a shortcut of what this report holds, but it literally is a genocide program transitioning us off of all known uses of fuels into renewables that are completely controlled by technology. So now let's get into that Australia information, because I find that to be just really horrific, Jana.
Yes.
And I will get to that.
And it's
We talked
let's
about
just,
what
before
was
you
happening.
go into it, remind people that it is from Australia. However, remember that these are global plans. So
Right. When I
Right.
was campaigning initially years ago and bringing awareness to the deployment of the electric smart meters, people were thinking that it was just in certain areas. And while we kept saying continuously, this is a worldwide deployment. This is Rothschild
right.
deploying smart meters, the smart grid, the global smart grid, so that you can have your energy turned off remotely. So, yes, thank you for pointing that out, Jana, because while it is occurring now in South Australia, this is what we face as well. And I even found this in some document here in the United States just the other day, and the reason I noticed it is it talks about COVID-safe check-in. So again, we're going to go over this. This is really very interesting, and all of you, as you hear this, you're going to have to think about if you're not wanting to be controlled and vaccinated, that also contain human body tissue in the vaccines, diploid it's called. You can look that up, diploid, DIPLOID. That's in most vaccines, and generally it comes from aborted fetal tissue. But we have to wonder if they have enough aborted fetal babies. Oh, one thing while I'm talking about aborted fetal tissue, Jana, there are a number of interesting documentaries that you can type in on YouTube. And one I would recommend everyone watch is Womb, W-O-M-B, a woman's womb. Womb on Sale. Womb on Sale. And you will understand how poor women in other countries are literally becoming birthing facilitators for genetically modified babies and couples that can't have children, and in vitro, etc. And then you will fall into this being a business throughout many countries, many third world countries, where women must use their bodies for the use of other people's children and for genetic modification of humans. So again, start with that YouTube video called Womb, W-O-M-B, on Sale. So now let's talk about the South Australian government has introduced what they're calling a COVID-safe check-in to enhance contact tracing and keep the community COVID safe. If anyone tests positive for COVID-19, the COVID-safe check-in enables the health department to quickly contact others who may have been exposed to the virus and stop the spread of COVID-19. Now, this is why in the beginning of our discussion this evening, I recommended many of you certainly put your cell phones in this Mission Dark EMF bag. And there are several different sizes, and you can go online and find this because you're tracked through your phones. So for the community, they're saying that the COVID-safe check-in is a new feature that is being added free to the South Australian government app. And you can download the My App by using your smartphone. They go on to talk about how you download the app from Google Play or your App Store, and to make sure that you also click on the latest version, which may require you to download app updates. If you do not have a compatible smartphone, a paper record will be available for you to provide your details. In other words, you're not getting around this, and we're going to talk about this now, and this is how we're going to be controlled and even more. But businesses, they talk about for businesses with the COVID Safe Plan will receive a new COVID Safe Plan via email that includes a poster with a unique QR code. This should be printed and displayed in a prominent location within all businesses. All approved businesses that can remain open must have a QR code. When people arrive at the business venue or event, people can check in by scanning the QR code using their smartphone through the app. A paper recording log template is available as backup for people who don't have a smartphone. All people entering the place must upload their relevant contact details to the approved contact tracing system. This upload is automatic when you use the COVID Safe check-in to scan the QR code. A defined public activity is any of the following. And now I'm going to go over where you must have the COVID Safe check-in app downloaded. Any on-site purchase and consumption of food or beverages, whether occurring in an indoor or outdoor area. In other words, any and all restaurants and consumption of foods or beverages, and you might want to also think about grocery stores there, although they do discuss that singularly. Sports, including sports training, fitness or recreation activities, all indoor public meetings, ceremonies of all kinds, private functions, provision of personal care services. That's barbershops, massage,
nails,
beauty salons, nails, yes. Provision of public entertainment, provision of recreational transport, operation of a nightclub, the operation of relevant licensed premises. In other words, all operations that must be licensed are going to be required to conform to this QR Safe check-in and have their QR code available at their entrance. Operation of a casino or gaming area, and they say within the meaning of the Gaming Machines Act of 1992. So what they're talking about is also using all of these apps on tribal lands, because that's where many of the casinos are. They talk about auctions and inspections of premises for the purpose of sale or rental of any property. So we're talking about rentals, we're talking about the sale of your properties. People, in order to access that opportunity, are going to have the QR code, and all sellers or landlords will also have to provide that information. Driver instruction. So if you're trying to get a driver's license, you have to first comply to the COVID Safe check-in. An assembly within the meaning of Public Assemblies Act of 1972. So you can look up the Public Assemblies Act of 1972 and see how long ago you were taken and now how you are being consumed by technology beyond our ability to comprehend. The provision, they go on to include the provision of health care, residential care, disability support, or aged care services. And this goes on, and I'm going to go on a little bit more. So again, activities and gatherings, COVID Safe check-ins will be required. There will be travel restrictions, we know that, international arrival restrictions, business restrictions and closures, visits to residential care facilities, restrictions on movement into, and in the case of Australia, they have Aboriginal communities. There are restrictions to go into their indigenous areas. That would likely be the case in any country that has moved the original occupants of the land into reservations, such as here in the United States. In fact, there's some very interesting YouTube documentaries about how we brought the indigenous people into the conformity of the Crown. and you can just type into a YouTube search things like Canada schools for Indigenous Indians. It's heartbreaking. Mm-hmm. The same thing for the United States. So let's continue on this COVID safe check-in. They talk about restrictions on at-risk care facility residents. In other words, you cannot go there at all if you don't have this check-in. Impact on court operations. Prison visits are suspended. Now, this is Australia, but this is likely to occur here in the United States Incorporated. And they go on to talk about how there will be COVID marshals. Now, what is a COVID marshal? They tell us COVID marshals are people who are assigned to apply COVID directions and restrictions in identified businesses and operations. Now, you will not be able to operate a business or any operation or any meeting without being involved in this COVID-safe check-in process in this QR app. So now they're going to hire the snitches to lurch at all businesses that are still able to be in operation. And they say that the COVID marshal must supervise all prescribed operations. And here's the activities that require a COVID marshal. A COVID marshal is required for the following prescribed operations: the on-site purchase and consumption of food or beverages, indoors and outdoors; religious, all faith-based ceremonies other than wedding ceremonies or funeral services; supermarkets and hardware stores; distribution centers, including associated transport operations; gymnasiums and fitness centers; swimming pools used by the public; sporting clubs. Any activity where a COVID management plan is required. We're all going to face COVID management plans. Any other operation which may be defined by the state coordinator. All operations. Who can be a COVID marshal? Well, they say that you must be 16 of age or over. You must complete a required training and keep records of the training to provide to an authorized officer on request. Take reasonable steps to visually identify as a COVID marshal. A COVID marshal is required to promote and ensure infection control practices, frequent hand washing. Now, before I continue with this, I want to add this. I downloaded from my city here in Northern California today their current COVID requirements. And I saw something there I had not seen before. Maybe some of you have. But beyond the requirements of hand washing, mask washing, social distancing, which is antisocial, of course, they want you to take your shoes off. Now, this goes back into the earlier conversation, Yana, when I was talking about sudden oak death and how UC Berkeley was creating the illusion that the oak trees were dying because of a disease. Now they're going to create the trackability of COVID on our shoes. That will further limit our ability to go outside, which is all part of the Sustainable Development Goals being fast-tracked by COVID. That's what this is. So we go back to who can be a COVID marshal, that you have to promote and take practical steps to ensure people participate that are in the operations are complying with density requirements, 1 person per 2 square meters. Now, of course, all of that is very fluid. They don't want us out and about. So the illusion of reduction of occupants in buildings is eventually there will be no more going into buildings. Everything will be through ordering online, and then that can be easily tracked and reduced based on your social credit score. But they go on to talk about COVID-safe plans and COVID management plans are specific policies and protocols in relationship to the prevention of the coronavirus, and they're to be effectively implemented and monitored. to ensure that the operations have sufficient seating, hand washing facilities, and cleaning regimens. Be present, supervising prescribed operations at all times except where site operates for 24 hours, or at all times means of high patronage. A person conducting a prescribed operation must ensure that the prescribed operations are supervised by a COVID marshal. If a place is used for prescribed operations, it must have a COVID marshal. Let's look at travel restrictions. Of course, we know that travel is all part of the presumed reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, lowering our ability to travel. This is all part of UN Agenda 21, Sustainable Development, and all the policies that have been adopted in all of your cities and signed on by all of your city councils, city managers, and your county boards of supervisors and planning commissioners, etc. They've signed you in to this.
Yes.
So they talk about travel within South Australia, but we have to remember that these are fluid. This changes by the day. They say some restrictions are currently in place for Aboriginal communities. And then lastly, but not lastly, of course, but all that I'll go through on this is testing for arrivals. A person who is in quarantine and refuses a COVID-19 test must remain in quarantine for an additional 10-day period and includes other persons quarantining with that person. A person under the age of 16 who is required to remain quarantined at a place determined by an authorized officer upon international arrival is required to submit a COVID-19 test on day 1 and day 5 and 12. If a child refuses or fails to submit to a test, the child must remain in quarantine for an additional 10 days.
Wow.
A person must not make a statement on an application upon arrival that is false or misleading, or refuse to fail to answer questions asked by authorized officers or a person responsible for assisting in the administration of cross-border travel. Any person wishing to enter South Australia from overseas will be required to complete a cross-border travel registration. Now, that's going on now in other countries as it is. I want to add a couple of things right now. Many of you might be going to your dentist, might be going into some other business, and they may want to take your temperature. Many are. Hold out your wrist and have them take your temperature on your wrist or on the fold of your arm where you bend your arm. Do not let them take the test on your head, because these are frequencies. They are leading to many injuries as far as the eventual injuries of frequencies on your brain and the calcification of the pineal gland.
Right.
So you don't want your children to have a semi-gun, be it a thermometer, aimed at their head either. You don't want your children being accustomed to being herd managed in such a inhumane way. And we must now preserve the humanity that we still have left as long as possible, because it is diminishing very rapidly, much more rapidly than I have words to even say. It is absolutely heartbreaking for many that understand the greater reality that we face. And Jana, I would like for you to talk about the how the QR codes will and why they will no longer be required after they move people onto that acceptance, and how the Bluetooth technology will be ingested. Would you discuss that for a moment?
Yeah, well, it's Steve who knows more about this than me. He's got a direct intel about this. Of course, it's going to start with the QR codes, but technology is going to be changing and changing extremely rapidly. And what Steve was talking about was that later it's going to be through a Bluetooth technology that will be drinkable, that we will have to drink something and ingest it. This technology will be ingested, and through that technology, they will be able to say whether we were vaccinated or not. But as you were, I think that Steve is going to go much more deeper into this on another show. But
Good,
what
good.
I was, what you were just discussing, Deborah, this is, of course, we know this is not about any kind of COVID. It's not about the flu, right? The coronavirus. This is about control. This is about complete surveillance control, and this is technocracy. This is dictatorship. This is the end of life as we knew it.
Absolutely.
I mean, you are talking about these officers or marshals. Is it COVID marshals?
COVID marshals.
Okay. And the requirement is that they're 16-year-old. I mean, does that ring the bell with Hitler Youth? I mean, these 16-year-olds are going to be patrolling adult people, elderly people. I mean, I cannot even imagine that kind of life. And we won't be able to go anywhere. I'm talking about nowhere. No groceries, no doctor, no dentist, no post office. Unless you comply. So I would like for people to start thinking about this, how they're going to live if their decision is not to comply. Okay, how they're going to live. How are they preparing physically and mentally for this, and most important, spiritually. And
that's exactly right.
I would like for people to remind them, give them a little hope and understanding, as a lot of our listeners are Christian people. And just to remind them that people who are responsible for this, what is about to happen and what's happening as we are seeing it, those are Luciferians, and they worship Satan. They're in contact with satanic demonic entities. Okay, and they worship Satan. They have been planning this for very, very long time. And as you said, Deborah, in our conversation, this is a last mop-up. Is that what you said? Like, this is just the last. This has been prepared.
Well, this is a mop-up
yes.
of the elimination and the change and moving us into a new age.
Exactly.
And we're not being moved into this new age.
Right. And I don't know who said it. There was some Luciferian that said nobody will enter the New World Order unless they worship Lucifer. So we know as Christians that our hope is in Christ, and the mystery, as Apostle Paul said, is Christ in us. We are not of this world. His kingdom is not of here. This is not our home. And our job here is to, of course, prepare, inform people, speak the truth, be a light, okay? Be kind, have love. And as you were talking, Deborah, with me about charity, do you want to talk a little bit about charity?
Well, absolutely, because as many of us are looking to survive the limitations of food and water and other types of survival things that you will need, it's important to consider how you will help your neighbors and utilize some of the things that you may have with your neighbors, because people will be caught off guard. Most people are not prepared. They don't believe that the power grid will go down. They don't believe that there will be failure of a catastrophic nature of all connectivity that is created on the internet. And we're seeing that happen. We were reading that about the attack on NSA. There have been attacks on many enormous databases that we have worldwide. This is the future. This is the new warfare that has been told to us years and years ago. And Yana, I will tell you, as I was walking in the downtown area, and I was passing a store today, I want to just say what was in front of this art gallery. And it said this quote, "Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" And I was profoundly moved when I read this plea from within the business area that is being exterminated. These people are intentionally being shut down. Yes. And I am looking forward to joining you again soon, perhaps before maybe even next week, because there is a Rockefeller Foundation document that I would like to discuss. It is necessary for people to understand some of where this control initiated and how all of our presumed elected officials have joined in, whether knowingly or unknowingly, or whether they have been compromised, right, or mind controlled. And we are in a moment now, I think, Yana, that for those of us that understand the deeper realities that we face, we do need to band together for emotional and psychological
support. Yes,
support, and we need to pray, and we need to know that there is a greater good here, to that Jesus will prevail.
Yes.
Many of you that certainly know that there is a better world for us to be in than here.
We are reminded of words of Christ when he said, "I'm going to prepare a place for you." And he also said, "My kingdom is not of here. It is not of this world. This world belongs to Satan, and Satan runs it." And we Christians, we do need to know that. So, Deborah, I want to thank you. And we are definitely going to be together soon again discussing another document that you mentioned. But I want to thank you for depth of your knowledge, for your dedication to people, and for studying of these documents and informing us so diligently. That's a lot of work on your part, and I want to thank you for such service to us. And
yes, Yana, I want to thank you as well for providing this opportunity for me and StopTheCrime.net. And certainly, I would again promote StopTheCrime.net and ask that everybody go and take a look at our video YouTube channel. Subscribe. Hope you press the like button. This will be on the YouTube video channel by tomorrow, this show right now. So you will be able to share this with friends if there were any parts of it that you want to listen to again. Isn't that right, Yana?
Yes, that's correct. We're going to edit it tonight, and it will be on our side. As listeners know, we were attacked on YouTube pretty bad. We are on brand new YouTube. We are on Patreon. We are on iConnect FX. And these will be the platforms where we will run this show. But Deborah is still up on YouTube. It is StopTheCrime.net. And Deborah, what is your other website as well?
Yes, primarywater.org.
Yes.
And teach your children the truth and get them out of school. And do not have them working on any wireless devices at all in homes. You're adding to their densification of frequencies that biologically we do not survive.
Right.
So again, thank you so much, Yana. Everyone, start educating yourself rapidly and do what you need to do to attempt to survive a little bit longer in this world that has genocide policies rolling out over all of us. Thank you, Yana.
Thank you, Deborah, again, and thank you all for listening. You all have a wonderful night.